Welcome to another episode of In Good Company. We've got a great guest today whose name is Steve Palise. He's a well-known property buyers advocate from Sydney and working all around Australia. Very, very well-known on the social media, puts out amazing content, very educational. He's one of the biggest property strategists specialising in commercial property investment in Australia. Steve, it's great to have you here, mate.
No, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
It's been a long time since we've been talking about doing a podcast together.
It is, when we met at the AFR Fast Starters Awards.
Yeah, I know. I was the 20th fast starting. You were like 18th or 17.
Yeah, we're very close.
Pretty good. Beat me there, mate. It's all good. And actually featured the next year as well for AFR Fast Starter for yourself. So well done, mate. It's awesome. Should have applied for it myself.
I'm actually done. Most of that stuff is just like accolades for social proof more than anything. Like I actually don't like most awards, but this one was off the numbers as opposed to the real estate awards. It is whoever sponsors the event.
Nah, that's awesome. That's awesome, Steve. Steve, obviously today I thought it would be a good idea to actually talk about the commercial property investment. A lot of our clients that we actually see who are sort of capping out a residential property, they're now looking to go out into commercial property themselves, and they are actually seeing some really, really good benefits. I haven't quite seen clients that are completely selling off their residential portfolio and it's just going completely into commercial. But from what I understand, that's what you've done after reading a little bit about you in your bio and so forth. You've got a really good background with Rethink. We actually sort of worked there before, and you ended up starting up your own company 3.5 years ago. Steve, talk to us about the background. Where did it all start? Why commercial property investment for yourself in the first place, and why you're so passionate about it? I'm keen to understand that.
All right, how long do we have? All right, so we go back. I studied robotic engineering at university. And then
my best mate did the same.
Oh, cool. And then my first job was like designing like robotic limbs and defibrillators and stuff like that, which is really cool. Being design doesn't pay that well though. And then I saw that mining, doing the same thing, which easier work designing mine, like big steel structures and machines, paid 3 times as much. So I'm like, cool, let's just do this for it. So I got into that. And then I bought my first property after seeing a few of those younger gurus. Do you remember like the Nathan Birches and the Zaki Amirs and all? They're all boasting about 50, 100 deals. And I went to school with like Nathan Birch and I was like, how's this guy doing so much better than me? And I'm saying that in a nice way, like a kind, like jealous way.
Yeah, of course.
So I bought my first little property in Blacktown in 2012 for 230 grand, which is funny at the time because I was living on the Northern Beaches and everyone was laughing at me saying, who's going to pay $250,000 for a house in Blacktown? Just sold that a couple of weeks ago for $550. So obviously some people, but then that grew because it was 2012. That grew about 80, 90 grand in the first year.
Wow.
So then you like at the time I think I was on like 80 grand a year, 90 grand a year kind of engineering salary. I was like, have I just made 5 years worth of savings from signing a piece of paper? And then full-blown addict after that, read every book, listened to every podcast, did all the thing, and then started accumulating. So I think I got up to about 9 residential properties before I bought my first commercial.
Wow.
I wasn't into commercial like everyone else. I believed the myths of, they'll sit in the vacant, you need a bigger deposit, they don't grow, all that type of stuff. However, I was the first employee at a company called Rethink Investing, which are now the big one. Yeah. We used to be a cash flow residential buyers agency.
Right.
So we bought about 1,200 residentials.
Probably a lesser known fact.
Yeah, so but that was back in the day where interest rates were lower. Yeah. So you could actually buy like houses and granny flats in like Logan and Ipswich and stuff like that were positively geared. So that was kind of our niche. And then we started getting people that wanted a bit more and we looked at it commercial. And I was against commercial because I'm like, this is too high risk. But as soon as we started looking into it, we're just like, what are we missing here? You can buy back at the time, this is what, 2017, 2018, you can buy stuff for 9% net yields, like a medical centre on a 7-year lease, and you're getting like 4 times the rent as a residential. I'm like, what am I missing here? Yeah. Then I went to the stats and found they actually grow the exact same as well. Like you go back every 10 years and they're doubling in value. I'm like, wait, so I'm getting 3-4 times the cash flow, still doubling in value. What am I missing here? Yeah. And then bought some for some clients, and then I obviously got into it because I was like, this is brilliant. Like you could buy my first one was 440 grand. It was positively geared like 15, 20 grand a year. Yeah.
So you're not by that what you mean is you're not paying anything from your pocket for the loan side of things as well. So it's just sort of getting the property, it pays for yourself and all that. Yeah.
Yep. And because I was having servicing issues, so I went through a divorce at that point. So I went from 2 incomes down to 1 income. Then obviously the banks weren't liking me when I went out on my own as well because you have to wait for that. But then I just kind of reassessed my life and was like, look, people always say this. They say, passive income will set them free and all that nonsense. On paper, I was like, how much do I actually need to be happy? And anything over like 200 grand plus passive income for me, I'm like, sweet, I can still travel, I can still climb mountains, I can still do adventure stuff, spend time with my daughter. So I sold up most of my resi portfolio, and I just recently bought a shopping centre for 3.175 mil.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in a moment, that's for sure.
Main thing, so I was at Rethink, bought lots of properties, helped them grow that to I think about 20, 30 staff when I was there.
Okay.
But I left because it started feeling like a job. It was these are the KPIs, these are the managed staff, all that stuff. Had a bit of an effort life moment, was like, let's go to Europe, spend a year there, travel the world. Obviously still had a following because my book just come out. And then started doing 1 deal a month, 2 deals a month, and then now we're up to like 20 deals a month. But I want to keep it a boutique agency because I don't want it to feel lifeless. I still want that kind of care and love to the clients.
Yeah, and that's a great small business mindset as well, because you want to be able to sort of provide that one-on-one sort of care to the clients, and that sort of makes a big difference, because I come from a big organisation myself. I came from Westpac, and obviously, it's you're actually sort of looking after a fair chunk of the customers, so you're not able to provide that sort of care and that sort of service.
Your mindset goes from the person to numbers. It's always about how do we get this much revenue or this much. It just disassociates it completely, whereas I still like the one-on-ones. Like we've got a good mutual client that we're kind of helping out, and we're doing conferences and stuff with. Like you get that kind of family.
Yeah, 100%. And that sort of makes the biggest difference as well. Just the joy that you actually get from doing that, you don't get that joy from anywhere else. So it's quite awesome.
Funny enough, I actually had the same thing happen to me with when I was building my wealth. So like every time I signed a new residential contract, I was actually getting more miserable. You'd kind of sign like the 7th contract, and another property I've got to worry about, maintenance, blah, 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 which shouldn't be the case. I remember when you sign your first few, you're over the moon. And the same thing happens in business as well. When you get your first client in your first business, it's a huge high. When you make your first 50 grand, it's a huge high. But then what happens is it goes exponential. It goes 50, 100, 200, 500, 1 mil, 2 mil, 3 mil, 5 mil. And it becomes like an unachievable end goal that you're never going to get to.
Yeah, and like what you just said about the residential property, that's exactly where I am right now as well. And that's what I was going to ask you. You said you had 9 residential properties, and after that 9th residential property, you decided to buy your commercial. Mm-hmm. I'd love to know what sort of mix you had in that residential portfolio. And the reason why I ask you that is because that's where I am right now. I've only got a residential portfolio at this stage. I just find that the negative gearing that you actually get out of it, yes, you get the tax benefits, it's just a big hole in the pocket. And I'm actually thinking myself that, once I bought that dream home, giving the wife and the kids what they actually need for a good life.
So I was still cash flow driven. So a lot of my properties were positively geared. So, scattered around Australia, but because interest rates were lower, I thought I had an awesome passive income. It was like 50 grand. I'm like, this is brilliant. And then interest rates kept going up. And like you mentioned, maintenance bills come in, and then that went down. And you kind of go, okay, I know I'm going to be okay in 10 years time, but I don't just want to be okay in 10 years time. I still want to enjoy now. And like I've done 20 countries in the last 2-3 years.
Amazing.
And then that's why I was like, okay, what do I actually need? And then that's when I was like, stuff it. Let's sell it, buy some really low risk commercial, and then just live life. And we'll talk about it later, but like my commercial will pay itself off in about 5 or 6 years. And then the passive income on that one goes to about 250. So if I buy 2 of those, $500,000, like what more do you need?
That's really good. Okay, so tell me about the challenges that you've faced. We'll go back to your business a little bit, and then we'll come back to the property portfolio. Tell me about the challenges that you've actually faced in sort of building the Palise property to what it is today.
It's funny I get asked that, because people always think they're like, oh, what did you want Palise property to be? I didn't actually have any conscious thought about it. It was just like, cool, I had a book come out. Let's just service whoever comes in. But the main lessons and challenges I had, I was doing it from the UK as a base and still traveling around Europe, which basically meant I was only available from like 3 p.m. till midnight at Australian time. Weirdly, that helped, because what happened was every time I did a sales call with someone, most were choosing 7, 8, 9, 10 p.m. because they've got kids. You also get both decision makers on the call. Whereas when I was in Sydney, I'd talk to like Joe Blogs. He'd go back and tell his wife like, oh, I chatted to this bearded guy. He said he's going to get us a 200 grand passive income. And it just kind of got it off. But by booking the after hours, I found my actual conversion was like 50%. Every second person I spoke to was signing up. The main issue then became the time zone difference. Was I'd wake up to 100 missed phone calls. Agents would call you, emails and stuff like that. But that was also a blessing in disguise, because it made me actually treat my business like a business. If I was in Sydney, probably for the first year, I would have ran around with a chicken with my head chopped off trying to do everything. I was like, sweet, I need to hire someone who can work from 9 to 5 and plug that gap. and also trust them because they don't have any. And Liam, my general manager now, who's the first hire I did, he's another engineer. He used to always say that. He's like, sink or swim, Steve, sink or swim, because he was on his own. Like, it was almost like it was his business as well.
Wow,
because he was like, but it also meant between both of us, we had to have smooth like systems and structures and processes in place. So we got the best like CRM system we could. We engineered the hell out of it. So we actually treated it like a business way before it was actually a business.
That's fantastic.
And that's why
really
now
good.
we've got 17, 18 staff and we've scaled so quickly in 3 years.
Yeah, because you've been able to actually have that sort of platform set up.
They know exactly where, and nothing gets missed as well. Everything's cross-checked and analysed and there's a process for it. So that was probably the best and the worst thing. Yeah. Worst thing for me was waking up at 4 a.m. And if you go to the pub and have a pint until midnight, waking up at 4 a.m. wasn't as fun. So I obviously got very tired in the first year or two. But then it was the hard parts, obviously, like scaling staff. Like, I'm not available. You're hiring these staff that you haven't even met, and you're just seeing them once a week for an hour here and there at 3, 4 p.m.
Amazing.
So that was hard. But again, sink or swim. Though you kind of had to trust them, and you found out who worked and who didn't work quite quickly.
And how long were you in Europe doing this?
First 2.5 years of the business. So
only 1 year you've been onshore in Australia because you've been.
No, I started the business. So I was probably 6 months in Australia, but I wasn't officially working in Palise property. I was still on the tail end of everything. I did a bit of a contract with a company called Suburbanite.
Sure.
And then went over. Then that was like day one basically. So I started this business from overseas and basically managed the first 2.5, which is funny when you come back each year, you like meet another 3 or 4 staff you've never met in your life.
That's a really good success story, Steve. That's fantastic. Well done, mate.
Yeah. What's funny is most like brokers and buyers agents were like telling me I was an idiot. Like, why are you doing this? Like, you've just got a book coming out. Now's your time to shine, yada, yada. But I love travel. So why would I don't want to do it when I'm 60. Let's do it now. And now they're asking me, how do they do it?
Mate, I'm gonna. I like that. I like that. I'm gonna take that page out of your book, mate. I'm definitely gonna do it. Let's talk about the books that you've actually written. So you've got 3 books that are out. What was the thinking behind it?
First one for the commercials. That was the first one on the list. That was actually still when I was at Rethink Investing, and I was head of sales there. It started off as an ebook, so I was like, I'm just going to write a 20-page ebook because what was happening was on my sales calls, they're going for like an hour and a half sometimes because I had to explain everything, like how a lease work, who pays the outgoings, the myth of vacancy, capital growth, all that type of stuff. So I'm like, to shorten this call, let's just send them a little ebook they can read before the call, and then the call is actually just the good stuff, like the strategy. What are you trying to achieve? What time frame? What finances do we allow? And then 20 became like 40, and 40 pages became like 80. And I was like, oh, stuff it. There's actually a book here. So I just finished it off. And then I actually wasn't going to like get it published. I was like, oh, let's just try a publisher because I read another competitor's book. It wasn't commercial. There's no commercial books at the moment. And I read it. I was like, this book's a big crap, to be honest. And then I saw it was published. I'm like, oh, this guy get published. So I literally called the publisher, and the owner of the publisher picked up the phone. I said, oh, I wrote a commercial book. And she's like, yeah, whatever. Send it to me and I'll have a look. Sent it to her. And then she called me back like 10 minutes later and she's like, you actually wrote a book. And I'm like, isn't that what authors do? And she's like, no. She's like, most companies get a ghostwriter. So you point out the book and then a writer fluffs it up.
Oh, I didn't know that.
She's like, you're the first person who's written it word for word and it's like a textbook.
Wow.
So that's the only reason it got published because it wasn't a name. She was just like, you've actually wrote quite a lot of good content here.
Yeah.
And that's why I went to market like 2 months after that. The resi one and the development one, I did the dot point one, which is a much funner experience than writing out text for text. After the commercial one, I started getting known as the commercial guy.
Yeah.
And anyone was coming to me like, oh, Steve, you're just going to convince me to buy commercial. You don't care about residential. I'm like, no, I had 9 residential property. So begrudgingly wrote a residential one just to show people I don't want to give biased advice.
Yeah,
it's
correct,
like, look, if residential's right for you, I'm all for it. And then just to close out the trilogy, my general manager is really into developments. So I was like, cool, let's do a development one. Now people can't say we don't give them options. If you want to get wealthy fast, you can do developments. If you want to do it safely and high LVRs, go residential. If you want cash flow, let's go commercial. And that's part of my business now is we can at least direct them in the right direction.
Right, gotcha. And I think that's a really good segue into what I want to talk to you about next, which is basically residential property investment versus commercial property investment.
The main difference between commercial and residential is commercial is just where a business operates and the primary use is to make a profit.
Yeah.
So you can still have a residential house that's a medical centre, for instance. Yes. Main difference is obviously loans. So talking to a good broker. Yeah. You can still get 80% LVR, which most people don't realise, but most of the time 70% and there's lease stock loans and things like that. But the biggest difference is you get 3 times the cash flow and the tenants sign longer leases. Yeah. So you get 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20-year leases, residentials week to week, obviously. And then people will talk about vacancy risk and all that. But biggest thing for me is you're getting 3 times the cash flow with no outgoings. Tenants pay council rates, water rates, maintenance, insurances. So when you get something, say like a 6% net yield, it's actually a net yield.
After paying all the
After
expenses.
paying all the expenses.
Yeah.
Residential, even if you get a really high yield at the moment, what, 4.5%?
Yeah.
You pay council rates, water rates, maintenance. Like most of the time it dwindles down to like a 2% net.
Correct.
So I'm getting 3 times the cash flow and I'm getting the same capital growth. So your actually ROI is way better. The difference with commercial, if you don't know what you're doing, you can burn yourself massively.
And that's what I was going to ask you. So what are the most common mistakes that you actually see a lot of first-time commercial property investors making?
It's actually sometimes similar to residential. Most people chase yield. You know, you get the clients go, I want to have, it's got to be a 6.5% gross yield. And they go buy in a really regional mining town. Yeah. The same thing sort of happens. You don't have to go in a mining town, but they'll go buy like a 7% net yield one in, let's just say, like Townsville. That's got high vacancy rates for industrial at the moment. They'll go that, and as opposed to buying, say, a really bulletproof 6% yielding one in Brisbane, vacancy rates on a 6% warehouse in Brisbane at the moment, it's like 0.3 to 0.8%. So if you lose your tenant, you fill it in a month or two. So you got tighter vacancies, you're going to get better rental increases, and you're going to get good capital growth versus the one in Townsville where vacancy rates are 1 to 3 years. So I don't care that you're getting a 7%. You're not getting rental increases, you're not getting capital growth, and you might sit there with an asset that gives you no income for 1 to 3 years.
Yeah.
So that I'm all for buying the boring tick the box properties, but that's where most people go wrong. The other one is just not doing due diligence. With resi, like you can literally check everything in an hour. Get your building and pest inspection and check flood mats, easements, do all the general macro stuff. Commercial, you got to do lease review, contract review, tenant interviews, road and traffic analysis, vacancy studies, occupancy studies, competition analysis. You actually talk to the tenant. There's just like literally there's like 100 things you got to do. It takes about 20 hours to do due diligence on a commercial.
Wow.
Most armchair investors don't do that. And any of those things, they can kind of fall over.
So if I was to just basically go out and buy a commercial property investment straight away, if I'm not putting time into doing the due diligence as you just described, it could be a pretty heavy risk investment for me.
You might be okay. Like I'm going to say like maybe 4 times out of 5, you might be okay as long as you're buying in a kind of blue chip area. But you don't want to be that 1 in 5 that burns themselves.
Yeah. I mean, like, especially the lease back ones, you know, you've got a owner that currently leases the property through a different company, and they're now looking to basically sell the property and so on and so forth. Those ones I find are quite high risk as well because they could present the property really well when they're selling it. They could interview really well. Firstly, I don't know a lot of customers that are actually buying commercial property, actually interviewing the tenants. Yeah. So that's one point.
We do every time because they're actually the best person because they give you all the negatives. And they also cry poor. So like they'll give you the worst case scenario. They're never going to be like, yes, Mr. New Landlord, we're doing really well, bump up our rent. So they tell you everything wrong with the building as well. But it's not just that, you got to do competition analysis as well. You find out like, the neighboring properties, are there any issues there? What's your biggest threat to your competition coming in? So there's all that part of it. But it's just like, there's so many things. But one of the things I hate is people encapsulate all commercial together. They go, don't buy commercial. They sit there vacant forever. No. What are they talking about? Are they talking about office space? Are they talking about industrial, suburban retail, online like retail? Like they're all kind of different nuances. It's like I don't say don't buy residential because Mount Isa might not be a good market.
Yeah,
like
sure.
they're all nuances. Vacancy rates for industrial at the moment in every capital city is sub 3%. Some areas like where I live on the northern beaches, 0% vacancy.
Sub 3%.
Sub 3%.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, for industrial.
That's awesome.
For retail, we're not, people say, retail spending's down, but we're not buying like a Westfields. Like not many people are. We're buying little suburban strips with like hairdressers, medical centres, cafes, that type of stuff. That one, you don't just get to look at data because what happened in, let's say, another shopping centre 2 kilometres away, it's nothing to do with yours. Yours has got completely different foot traffic, road traffic. Sometimes you go to the little strip stop and they're like ghost town. There's something not quite, they're all tenanted, but there's something not quite right about it. And other ones you go there and they're just pumping, they're heaving with people. So that one's all about foot traffic and road traffic and the vibe of the shopping centre, but they can still do really well. The negative with those, if you lose your tenants, generally about 6 months vacancy, but the tenants stay longer. Because an industrial, like if the business grows, they outgrow the space and they move on.
Correct.
If a hairdresser does well, they open another salon.
Yeah,
so they stay there. So you get them for the life of the business. So there's always a pro and a con. I don't really buy office space.
Yeah.
I equate that to like buying high density apartments, off the plan apartments. Obviously post-COVID, I was kind of safe as well because I wasn't buying them, but vacancy rate's like 17% on average. I know which one's probably going to grow more in the following years. But again, risk and reward, you can get like a 9% yield if you want to buy office space.
Yeah.
But you've got a 17% vacancy rate versus 0% vacancy rate where I live and getting, say, a 5% on the northern beaches.
Yeah. And I think like that's where the commercial investing is actually quite interesting because it's not about the vacancy rates. It's not about like, the area you actually buying the property and so on and so forth. It's also about the type of tenant, like as you said, the hairdresser, if they actually sort of, outgrow their business, they'll actually look at putting up a new salon, whereas a warehouse operator will probably look at outgrowing their space or look at sort of buying a bigger space and so on and so forth. So there's a few parts that you actually got to consider.
Yeah, warehouses are good if you're starting out because you can sort of get like-for-like comparisons. You can look at a body corporate warehouse and go, okay, what do they sell for in the block per square metre? What do they rent for in the block per square metre? What ones went vacant? How long are they vacant for? And then you can do that for the adjoining complexes and they're a bit more like for like. Suburban retail is a bit more, you got to be business savvy with it. But I like industrial. It's just easy.
Yeah.
Versatile as well. It can be a car mechanic, wholesaler, fabricator,
Correct.
distributor, storage. There's a few more nuances with suburban retail strips.
And that's the exact reason as well, as you would probably already have seen, that most banks actually like industrial more than your retail and so on and so forth as well. And the biggest reason about that is because, if the tenant was to exit the property, it won't take them very long to actually be able to sort of, get someone else in. Or if the buyer goes bust, then it won't take the bank too long to liquidate the property. So,
funnily enough, for industrial at the moment, vacant properties are selling more than tenanted ones. It used 5 years ago, complete opposite,
That's
having a
very
tenant.
interesting.
And that's just because businesses are looking for it more. So you actually wait for your tenant to leave before you sell the property now and you'll get a premium for it.
Yeah.
It used to be complete opposite. We used to be like paying probably 10, 15% more just to get a tenanted property.
Yeah.
So like games change. That's one of the reasons why I kind of feel comfortable with investing in industrial is if more owner occupiers are looking than investors, it's a good sign the economy's doing all right.
Does that make your job a little bit harder as well, Steve? Because you've obviously got the investors that are looking to buy like industrials for investments.
Not so much from the availability. What actually that changes, well, yes, there's less properties, but it means we're paying a premium compared to last year. So cap rates are kind of compressing. So we're buying in Brisbane 6.2% a year and a half ago. Now we're lucky to get a 5 in front of it. So it's making the hard job is convincing a buyer, hey, 5.4% is actually a good buy. And they go, oh, about a year ago I was selling for 6.2. I'm like, yep, you missed that boat. It's the same thing with residential. People go, oh, wish I bought Perth 2 years ago. I'm like, well, you didn't, so let's move on.
Is that a cycle that you see in Australian property market? Or probably to better rephrase the question, how do you actually see the commercial property market performing in Australia in the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
Sort of a loaded question because it's always case by case based on the local economy. And this is like, I'm doing a conference tonight with Terry Ryder who talks about hotspotting, and he's all about like what infrastructure is going into an area. The same thing sort of applies for commercial. Like buying on the outskirts of, say, a Brisbane or a Perth is completely different to buying in the inner suburbs surrounded by residential. And then what infrastructure is going in, like if they're doing a new hospital, that's going to benefit the industrial space, for instance. Sure. I see a good thing. I've never seen as tight and so many businesses trying to buy their own premises, which means I think we're in a good run. But again, when you're buying it, you need to still plan for the next 10 years and make sure there's good population growth, there's still jobs going. And also be aware, like those numbers can change based on what infrastructure is going in. Say they're building a new road and you're like, oh, cool, that's cool. There's going to be lots of workers there. They're going to rent warehouses for their machinery and stock and supplies. Once the road's finished, they're not there anymore. So vacancy rates might be tight now, but are they going to still be tight in 5 years' time when it's finished? Yeah. Something like a hospital, they'll have 5,000 people building the hospital. When they leave, there'll be 5,000 jobs. So that's another 5,000 people population growth coming in that are going to need houses. And people that live in houses are going to need car mechanics and wholesalers. And that's one of the funny ones I get where people always say, oh, everyone needs a roof over their heads. Yeah. My joke is, where do they think the roof came from? So if you live in this world, you need suburban retail and you need industrial properties for every aspect of your life.
I love that analogy, actually. Steve, let's bust a myth here, right? So you actually mentioned that, you did your research and you actually found that, cap growth in commercial properties also doubling every 10 years. Mm-hmm. So what ratio of commercial property would you say that theory stays true?
Surprisingly, all of them. Let's take office space out though, because let's just talk about stuff with land components.
And in the same instance, like with residential, take apartments out.
Yep, that's right. So It actually grows the same, and it kind of has to, because you can't have a $500,000 house next to a $500,000 warehouse and the house go to $1 million and the warehouse stay there renting for 3 times as much. But this is also where the myth comes from, because sometimes they happen out of cycle. So the residential will grow and then people go, oh, I told you, don't buy industrial, like the house is growing. Then commercial will grow. Okay. But on average, if you can find, like, typically it's between 5.5% and 6.5% capital growth year on year. Every warehouse has doubled in the last every 10 years, the last kind of 30 years as well. But again, it depends what you're buying. Different markets, if you're buying on an outskirt in a oversupplied market, if you're buying a retail in a mining town, they're kind of different. But they have to remain on par, because if someone can afford the rent for a house, a business can afford the rent for the property, because they can't live in the area and not afford the house rent but afford the industrial rent. So they always remain on par.
And they can't also, and business cannot also operate if there's no demand in the area itself.
Yeah. So people always say, like, oh yeah, wait, I've seen properties that are going to sit there vacant for God knows how long. If all the commercial properties are vacant in an area, how the hell are people paying their rent? Yeah. Like that's where jobs are. Yeah. Like we're in an office space now. Like that, you need kind of both. But again, commercial, it's so nuanced on what you buy. Like if you buy a really specialized asset, like, I don't know, a car, like banks don't like this, like car wash stations.
Yeah, sure.
And you lose that tenant, that's going to sit there vacant for years.
Correct.
But again, you can buy an off-the-plan apartment and pay $200,000 too much for it. You don't do silly things. Buy boring properties. Good tenant, good location, tight vacancy rate, versatile premises, good capital growth prospects. Just tick all the boring boxes. The way I kind of calm people down a little bit, they'll say, it's scary having, like, even if you lose your tenant for 6 months, how do I handle my mortgage for 6 months? Yeah. If I'm getting 3 times the rent in a commercial compared to a residential, my commercial can actually sit there vacant 2 out of 3 years and I'm in the exact same cash flow position. And when I kind of position that, people, you can see people's brain ticking over going, wait, it can sit there vacant for 2 years and 1 year tenancy and I'm still all right?
Yeah.
So if you go buy a commercial and say a 3-year lease and you get 3 years worth of rent and it's 3 times the cash flow, that property can effectively sit there for 9 years. Yeah. And I'm in the same thing. You've got your buffer. But people don't see it that way. They spend the money when it hits their account and they don't have their buffer. So that's probably the argument, is you need to understand your buffers with commercial more than residential.
Yeah. And to your clients, do you actually advise them on keeping some buffers?
Yeah, it depends on what we're buying as well. Sure. And what the type of job they're in. But yeah, you should always have a buffer. When we present our due diligence report, which is about 80 pages long, we do a vacancy study. So we look at all the properties that are vacant, how long they're vacant for, and you come up with your number off that. So if it's an industrial and we go, look, in the last 2 years, here's the 20 properties we found vacant. Longest one was 4 months. 6 months, more than enough buffer. If I'm buying a suburban retail and we find most of them are 6 months, we might go, hey, it's probably good to have a 12-month buffer there. But you can also incorporate that in your strategy. Our clients that buy 3, 4, 5 commercial, don't get them all having all the leases ending at the same time. Have one ending next year, one on the year after, one after. So you actually only need one buffer the whole time. But the cash flow will be enough to give you the buffer anyway if you buy a good lease.
Yeah, that makes sense. Steve, the RBA rate cut is being talked about by everyone at the moment. Talk to us about what your thoughts are on the rate cuts and how that impacts commercial property.
You're not going to like my response on this.
I'd love to hear.
I actually don't care. I'm not buying a commercial for the next 6 to 12 months. Sure. I'm buying it for a client and for myself for the next 10 years. You should have been preparing for high interest rates 5 years ago. You should be preparing for high interest rates in the next 5 years. I always plan for the worst and hope for the best. You can't control that. The thing is, when people ask me what I think, they're kind of saying, do you think there's a time, is it worth waiting? Do you think it's going to come down and it'll be a better time in the future? Do you know anyone who's actually picked the market based on interest rates? No, and the other funny thing, people got this weird assumption that when interest rates come down, property prices are going to go up. And my counter argument to that is interest rates were going up and property prices went up. So why do we have it both ways? Why do we have rising interest rates, rising prices, lowering interest rate, rising prices? They saying it's an infinite growth cycle. So I know I'm being a bit facetious, but the everyday investor can't control that. You can just look at your circumstances, what you can afford, and have a long-term mindset. The interest rates are going to change. I have no idea if they're going to be 2% or whether they're going to stay at 5 or 6% or whether they're going to go up to 10%. Our cash flow analysis tool looks at all of them.
Okay. And I think the reason why I asked you that question, obviously, is because one of the things that sort of get impacted is the borrowing capacities with the interest rate. So are you saying that if the interest rates are going high, The only difference really is that the person with deep pockets is able to buy that investment instead of that person with not so deep pockets.
Again, it depends what the prices are doing. And like normally prices will affect sometimes sentiment in the market. That also the interest rates also affect the rents. So as we've seen the high interest the last few years, the rents have all caught up. Like the industrial like rents have grown by 10 to 15% year on year because they've got to pass it on to someone. Yeah. If the costs of goods and services are going up, guess what? The costs of rent's going up. That's a goods and services as well. Yeah. I've never met anyone, like I know literally thousands of investors now who's actually been able to pick a market perfectly. And say, by that I mean most people can pick it like say 3 years, but 6 to 12 months, we've got no idea. Like the governments don't even know. So how are we going to know? Yeah.
Okay. That's a good answer. I'll take that. And Steve, how much of AI are you using in your business right now? We actually hear a lot of buyers advocates these days saying, AI driven analysis of figuring out how the property market's going to do and so on and so forth. I personally find that quite comical, only because I actually have a client who works at Atlassian, and they work with AI day in day out, and they actually talk to a BA who just basically are very, very vocal about AI and social media and so forth. And when they actually saw their work, they were like, "This is like the most basic form of AI that they're currently using."
It's just marketing tools. That's the thing. You use it in regards to it's good for data and analyzing things, but it just does things faster. Okay. There's still property databases like Suburbs Finder and HTag and stuff where you get the actual data from. AI is just a fancy word basically to make sure thing. Like I said, all the companies I know that say they do AI and they find the hotspots through AI. They're not. You talk to them, you ask them, what's a data check? We're checking 20,000 servers. I'm like, there's lots of websites that do that already. Like you're not doing anything special. It's the same as the ones that I always find funny where they invent a formula. They're like, we've got the Goldilocks formula to find the next hotspot. You kind of like, that's not a formula. Like, tell me what it is then. Give me the mathematical equation. They kind of just shrug their shoulders. So but I think that's also why I'm somewhat successful is I don't do all that fluff. Like my books are very boring. I get told they're a textbook. Yeah. So if you want to understand leases, there's 20 pages on how to understand a lease. You're just going to make sure you don't do anything silly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty traditional kind of guy in that instance as well. And I think like, when I actually heard about your process of like, sort of doing the due diligence, talking to clients, talking to the tenants, figuring out what the market sort of holds for this commercial property and so on and so forth. I reckon I'll probably pay a lot of respect to that kind of analysis.
AI it's a tool. So like the equivalent is like when I became an engineer, I'd go to the office and I was a design engineer. So I'd use 3D modeling software to design what I was doing. And all the old blokes there were like, I can't believe you don't know how to use a drafting board, to draw it by hand. I'm like, well, I don't have to. This thing spits it out for me straight away. Sure. They're just dinosaurs now because they lost their job because they couldn't use the 3D modeling software. That's what AI is going to do. And like my equivalent is like, I use AI in regards to like, it knows what I'm going to say in my emails now. Yeah. Like I literally, as I start one of my sentences, it completes the whole sentence for me based on my previous ones. I'm like, this knows my voice now. So it'll just be more of a tool that you can kind of use. But I'm actually quite scared of AI kind of wiping out a lot of the middle class because it's removing knowledge. Like most people's job is based on knowledge. Like, I know the Brisbane market better than anyone. Yeah. Like if you're a lawyer now, like it can scour every single text and give you some form of logic back. So do you really need 50,000 lawyers? Yeah. Probably not. Yeah. So I'm quite scared. So one of my personal things I'm looking at the side is maybe buying some like fruitful land in like Tasmania, knowing if the world turns upside down, at least I've got my tinfoil hat location.
Yeah, that's good, Steve. I think you have also talked a little bit about like, sort of rent investing as well yourself. Like you actually sort of just choose to live in front of the beach and like, choose to actually live in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and you want to be able to get that lifestyle and not have to worry about paying a mortgage. So through that, I'm sort of going the whole passive income piece. Would love to know your approach there and how you strategize the whole thing.
It's a good question. So similar to you, like I've got a family, like a 22-month-old baby, and I've still got the little thing in the back of my mind, being like, buy a principal place of residence, buy a principal. But where we live, the houses are like $6 million. That's not even like beachfront. I'm talking that's like 2 streets back. It's freshwater. Right. On the beach. 2 streets back. So it's a nice house. It's a 3-4 bedroom, reasonable house. But there's nothing mansion about it.
Yeah, sure.
For $6 million, like how much is that going to cost me in a mortgage? Like what, $300,000 a year, whatever? Yeah. I just bought a $3.1 million shopping centre that gives me $220,000 rent.
So what's that yield?
So it's 6%.
Yeah,
About 6%.
okay.
So I could theoretically go back and buy 2 of those.
6% net yield.
Yeah, 8 tenants. So that's sort of why I bought it as well, because it's low risk. If I lose 1 tenant, I still get 7/8 of the rent.
Fantastic.
It's also a big land. It's 3,500 square meters with some value add. I can build up. I can change it to apartment block, etc. I won't, because it's a passive investment for me. But I started looking at that and go, okay, if I just buy 2 of these instead of the $6 million house, I'm going to have $400K plus rent coming in. Compare that with the $300K negative. It's like $700K difference. Yeah. So if I want to go spend $700K now, I can go live in literally a mansion and be in the same net position. So that's why we made the decision as a family. Okay, let's just buy 2 of these things, have a good run. If the market, I'll be honest, if the market does well in the next 5 years, probably use some of that cash flow to then buy a mortgage and get a principal place of residence and go from there. But I just think having like a $500,000 passive income is a pretty strong position to be in.
Of course.
And reasonably low risk. Like my next one's going to be probably an industrial warehouse complex, get 4 or 5 tenants there. And that way I'm kind of spread the risk. Still got like other few little investments, commercials and things like that. And then just enjoy life a little bit more.
Yeah, okay. And this shopping centre that you actually bought, is that metro? How far is it from the...
It's in Regent's Park, so it's like 40 minutes there. So it's in the Logan LGA.
Sure.
But what I liked about it was next to a major public school, next to a major kindergarten, and no other retail shopping centres within about a 1.5 kilometre radius. Beautiful. So there's like 5 square kilometres, no competitors, all surrounded by residential, and the houses around itself are between 850 and 950. And I've got 3,500 square meters. I'm like, this actually seems like not bad value. Yeah. So I sold, was it 4 or 5 residentials for that one?
Yeah.
Bought it with a 50% deposit. And so it's $100,000 a year positive now in my pocket. Yeah. So the funny thing is I actually sent it to a couple clients and they said no, because we were actually overpaying for it a little bit. Sure. And I was fully aware I was overpaying. I've got a qualified value in my team and I was paying about $75,000 too much.
Sure.
But because normal, the yields for retail kind of about 6.3% in that kind of area in Brisbane. Like for $75,000 on 3.1 mil, I'm like, it's only like 2 or 3%. It's like buying a $1 million house for $1,020,000. But I'm getting a big land component and I've got no competitors. And it's point proven. So like there's actually a vape shop in mine and my partner's an insurance broker and she's like, hey, vape shop's insurance premiums are going through the roof. They don't want to touch because they keep getting firebombed. So we actually kicked them out at the end of the lease about a month ago now. We've already got another tenant, a barber shop, paying an extra $8,000 a year rent compared to the vape shop. So that $8,000 is actually $150,000 worth of value in terms of cap rates.
Of course it does.
Yeah, so because I've got no competition, it's in demand. That's proven my point of like getting a better quality asset gets better rental increases, lower periods of vacancy. And that's why I know, okay, this centre is going to be all right. I did my due diligence. Last 10 years, there's only been 2 vacancies and the longest vacancy was 6 months. I'm like, it's pretty low risk. And then I visited it and there was lots of people buzzing about at different times of day and I went in over 2 days. So I just ticked all the good like fundamental. There's nothing special about the deal. People come to me sometimes wanting a unicorn. It's a boring, good tenant, good location, tight vacancy rate, no competitors in the area. Just tick the boxes, just somewhere to park my money safely so when I'm gallivanting around Europe, I don't have to stress too much.
Yeah, 100%. And the cap rate, by cap rate, what you mean is the lease to the value of the property.
The net yield. Cap rate's just a term that basically means net yield, but you use it to compare like for like. So you might say like a medical centre has a cap rate of 5, so 5%. The net yield might be 5%, then that's what you're saying. Yeah. But a shopping centre will be 6 to 6.5. Yes. And industrial will be 5.5. So it's just to compare like for likes. So it means capitalisation rate.
That's awesome, mate. I hope you actually get to that target of getting your second one, and after that, you know,
money's there. Just got to find it. So next time will be soon. So I hope maybe get me back on in a few months' time, and we'll talk about the next deal.
I can't wait. That'll be awesome, Steve. Hey, Steve, thanks for coming in. Probably one of the better ones that I've actually done in terms of the podcast episodes. Pretty keen to actually do the conference with you on Saturday for the doctors. That would be really, really good. But if we have any clients, they can find you on socials as at Palise Property or Steve Palise, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Anywhere else they can find
Just type in Steve Palise or PaliseProperty.com. I'm all over socials. So.
and they can probably also find your book on the airports, mate.
Yeah, or go to PaliseProperty.com. It's actually free. I just charge postage. And the only reason I charge postage, it's not a money making venture. It's just to weed out the people who actually want to read it and don't want to read it.
No, fantastic. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for coming in today, mate. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, mate.
Thanks a lot.